Hi, I'm Tim Williams. I'm the lead litigation attorney here at the firm. In this short video, I'd like to talk about knee fractures. Knee fractures can occur in a variety of different ways. I'm just going to run over a few of them for the purposes of this video and try to keep it short. So looking here, we have a diagram of the knee. This would be the left knee looking at the front. We can rotate this around and look at all angles of the knee. But for the purposes of this conversation, let's remove some of this tissue and get down to the bones since we're talking about fractures. So this is a pretty good shot here. You can see this is again the front of the knee. There's your patella or your the front of your kneecap. We have some ligaments here out the sides. So there's some ligaments down underneath that go through the interior of the knee itself. And then you have these the bones. These are your two lower leg bones. This is your upper leg bone there. And the knee is simply where those bones, those sets of bones come together. So what we usually see, first and foremost, with direct impact injuries, and generally speaking, whenever you have a knee fracture, it's usually involving direct impact. We see the patella or the kneecap itself fractured. It can be fractured in half, it can be fractured in quarters, and it can be mashed. All sorts of different types of fractures, and depending on the type of fracture, the doctor or the surgeon will have a different approach. Generally speaking, surgery is not recommended and not done on the kneecap because it tends to fuse back together in relatively quick time without much complication. A different type of fracture you can have is what's called an avulsion fracture, where part of the bone is actually lifted off or pulled off away from the main bony area. And that, as we see, usually is involving these ligaments that we see visualized here. So we see this ligament on the outside of the knee. You can see they're going to go back to the front. You can see the two sets of ligaments on either side. Well, these can actually pull off with sufficient force to where you can get the tendon literally pulling that outside portion of the bone away from the main bone itself in the leg. So that's what's called an avulsion fracture. Generally speaking, with an avulsion fracture, the surgeon would need to put that back into place and secure that somehow to allow the fracture to heal again. So generally speaking, there is surgery involved. Sometimes it involves hardware, such as pins or plates. Sometimes it doesn't. Usually a pin would be used or a screw. A different type of fractures, what most people think of a leg fracture, involve through and through fracture of, in this case, the upper bone. This is just below the thigh, right above the knee. Or it can involve one or both of the lower bones of the leg as well, as we see down there. Those are a little different. If you have a full fracture, for example, of your femur or your thigh bone, generally speaking, they are going to do surgery in that. They're likely to put a rod down the middle of it and then secure it with plates. And so that way you can have that bone heal in an anatomical fashion, meaning straight and not off to one side or another or crooked or misplaced. So because that's the main supporting structure of your body, and they want to make sure that heals appropriately. So usually if you have a fracture of your thigh bone, they're going to do surgery. Your lower leg is a little bit different. It just depends on the type of fracture, whether it's a complex fracture, a simple fracture, displaced or not displaced. Displaced just simply means it's moved out like that at the fracture site. Non-displaced means that there's a hairline fracture through it, but it's still anatomically correct. Generally, those types of fractures, they're just going to cast them, let them be, they'll heal on their own. If they're actually displaced, sometimes they can get them popped back into position, sometimes cast them, let them be, heal on their own. Oftentimes, displaced fractures, particularly involving bone fragments, they're going to have to open you up, go in there, clean some of that out, piece it together as best they can, oftentimes putting plates or screws into the bone structure itself to allow it to heal. And when that occurs, many times down the line, they'll actually go back in and take a lot of that hardware out, particularly if it's causing any problem. So that is the short version of a long story involving knee fractures. Again, there's many types of knee fractures, there's many approaches. It's a very case-dependent, very person-dependent based on their activity level, their hobbies, so on and so forth. And hopefully you find this instrumental and informative.
If you've been injured and need help, Dwyer Williams Cherkoss attorneys will get you the settlement you deserve. Experience gets results.